This is a Sandler Training audiobook, produced and distributed by Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, in partnership with Sandler Training. Winning from Failing by Josh Seibert. Narrated by Sean Pratt. We hope you enjoy this program. Note: because the English language lacks a generic singular pronoun that indicates both genders, we have used the masculine pronouns for the sake of style, readability, and brevity. This material applies to both men and women. Forward. David Sandler, the founder of our company, famously said, "You have to learn to fail to win." It sounds like a paradox. But Sandler's observation is not self-contradictory. He meant that failure is a part of the learning process, and that all true winners are out to learn and grow as they move forward in life. Josh Seibert's exciting new book shows company leaders how to harness the natural adult learning progression. It shows sales leaders and others how to create, support, and sustain a workplace learning culture that measurably improves performance. Josh knows, just as David Sandler knew, that launching such a culture always starts with top management's recognition that it is okay, even essential, for people to fail, within clearly defined boundaries that everyone understands. Winning from Failing offers a proven roadmap for creating a high-performance learning culture in your organization, based on the principles of the Sandler Selling System methodology. It's an important addition to the emerging, deepening discussion about how adults learn in the workplace. David Mattson, President and CEO, Sandler Training. Prologue. This book in a nutshell. At Sandler Training, which I have been part of since 1999, we make our living helping sales teams. Many of the people we talk to are short on time. With them in mind, I've condensed this book's big ideas, which I trust will be invaluable not only to sales leaders but also to chief learning officers, presidents, CEOs, and human resources professionals. All of these people have a vested interest in compressing and maximizing the learning curves for sales managers and salespeople, and ultimately for everyone in the enterprise. Point 1. Adults don't learn the way most think they do. Adults learn differently from the way most people think they learn. Exposure to facts does not equal learning. Sometimes leaders pretend that the simple exposure of their people to facts is synonymous with learning. In the real world, adults don't learn by memorizing facts. There's a natural progression from acquiring knowledge to the application in their role, to developing skills, and to adopting new habits. It looks like a cycle, starting with knowledge, which leads to application, then skills, then habits, then results, which lead back to knowledge. Point 2. Adults learn best in a learning culture. Whether they admit it or not, most books and expert training programs for adult learners work on the assumption that exposing adult learners to facts and then testing them on their retention of the facts is a path to mastery. It isn't. At Sandler, we believe that you have to create and sustain a learning culture that encourages people to attain new or different results and sustainable behavioral change. Most books, including this one, are collections of knowledge. Some books assume that once you know X, you can then go out and do X. That skips over the issue of whether or not a learning culture is in place. This book won't tell you, "Here are the templates you have to learn. Memorize them and your life will change." What it will do is help you get started on the challenging, long-term effort that results in an ongoing culture of learning. This book, and Sandler Training as a whole, operate on the assumption that knowledge is just the beginning of the process, not only for salespeople, but more importantly, for the people who lead them. Certainly, increasing knowledge will help, but it's not enough. To create a space where it's safe to do something with what you've learned and the skills that you've acquired, to apply them in a different manner, to get a different outcome, that's the process you will explore here. That's what Sandler training is all about. That's the reason we build our training and development strategies around the principle of long-term, ongoing reinforcement. It's not just because we want our clients to know our content precisely as it's written, but because it's necessary for the salespeople and managers we train to use that knowledge to change their behaviors and apply the ideas in a way that will create different results. Point 3. Supporting a learning culture means making it okay for people to fail. Did you have to read point 3 twice to make sure it really said what you thought it said? That's a common reaction to the idea that it's okay to fail. Many managers and executives demonize failure of any kind. This pressure creates the opposite of a learning culture. It creates a culture of fear. Here's the reality about learning. Adults learn best when they fail within clearly identified safe borders, spaces where it is okay to fail. In fact, that's the only way they learn, retain, and implement new skills based on behaviors that you want them to master. Many managers misunderstand when we talk about making it okay for their people to fail. This book is not about letting people fail to do their job. Instead, it's about creating an environment that gives people a clear window of time, or an environment within which they can apply something, fail without being punished, try again until they become more confident, eventually master the new behavior, and change the result to one that everyone wants. Believe it or not, that's what always makes the difference in terms of team performance. The presence of a learning culture, supported from the top down, that makes it okay to fail within clearly defined boundaries. Point 4. Start with managers. It surprises most organizations I work with to learn that their very best initial investment of time, money, energy, and attention is not to train the sales team. It's to train managers. If this sounds counterintuitive to you, if you're tempted to fix the performance challenges you face by first training the salespeople, then I want you to know that I wrote this book for you. Know that you are not alone in feeling as you feel, and please, do keep reading. This book. Consider this book a collaborative project between you and your coach. I'm going to play the role of the coach. In our coaching sessions, each exactly 1 chapter long, my aim is to support everything that needs to happen for you to produce the kind of learning culture that makes personal and professional breakthroughs possible. Let's get started. Part 1. How hard could it be? Chapter 1. To change results, change the culture. This book is about creating and sustaining a learning culture, the kind in which salespeople thrive even after the training is over. Creating that kind of culture takes action. Simply reading the words and nodding in agreement, simply sharing the book with other people, simply asking people whether they read the book or got anything valuable out of it, will not deliver a change in your working culture. Guess what? Testing people in a written format to check whether they've memorized the content on these pages won't deliver a change in your working culture either. Let me be clear. If you're a manager, you must transform the experience of failure within the organization and help people who report to you condition themselves to learn from failing. That means you must redesign the experience of failure within the organization. And, perhaps most importantly, condition yourself to learn from failing, to make it a cornerstone of your own plan for personal development. I call this winning from failing. And it takes time and practice. David Sandler, the founder of our company, created a revolution in selling. He did that by giving people the tools they needed to create both a different kind of working culture and a different selling routine. Both of those things, the working culture and the selling routine, were synchronized to match up with how adults learn and master new skills, new behaviors, and new outlooks on life. Sandler's message was pretty simple. If you want to change the results, you need to change both the working culture and the selling routine. The reason is that most working cultures punish failure. Yours may do so in subtle ways you haven't even noticed. Helping you get better at noticing is one of the major objectives of this book. Let's start, though, by recognizing that you really do want a culture that rewards learning and growth. If you, like me, hold that truth to be self-evident, we're off to a good start. You have to learn to fail to win. David Sandler. Chapter 2. A Dream Come True. When senior management at Prudential Financial said they wanted to promote me to sales manager in 1983, I figured my ship had finally come in. My dream was coming true. I was going to be a major player. My agency had consistently ranked in the number 1 or number 2 spot in my region. I knew the business inside and out. I had seen others get promoted to such jobs, people who hadn't had the success in the field that I had. Prudential had finally gotten it right. There was every reason to believe that I could be a great sales manager. I was the perfect candidate. I had started my own agency. I had built it up to a substantial size in a relatively short period. I was a self-starter. I had hired some administrative help along the way, yes, but for the most part, I had gotten the business off the ground all on my own, as my agency's senior and only salesperson. When corporate management told me they wanted to promote me, my chest swelled with pride. Who else would you want to pick to lead a sales team? Nobody, that's who. I had already built a successful agency from scratch. Clearly, I knew all the angles. My district manager at the time told me that I would have no problem making the transition to management. This, he said, was the brass ring. As one of the top-performing insurance agents in the nation, I was about to catch it. He was proud of me. He wanted me to know I deserved this opportunity. I couldn't have agreed more. My district manager knew I wanted to expand my business. I could either keep developing my own business with my money, or I could use Prudential's money to build a sales team and reap the rewards that way. One way or another, I was going to build an organization. The only question was whether Prudential was going to finance me. It seemed like a pretty easy call. I told my district manager, yes. He shook my hand. All you've got to do, he told me, is show people how to do what you do. How hard could it be? I signed on. I moved my family from Charleston to Columbia in South Carolina. I took over a new office. I got ready to tame the world. There were 12 people on my new team. All I had to do, as my manager had said, was teach them to do what I did as an individual. How hard could that be? Sure, these were people who had not reached their full potential, but that's why I was there. I talked to all of them. They were smart. Prudential didn't hire dumb people. They just didn't know how to do what I did. Yet. I could tell they wanted to succeed. If I could just get 8 or 10 of those 12 people to come close to my performance levels, the team would be in great shape. We would be on top of the world in no time. From the district manager's point of view, and from mine as well, it was just a matter of getting me to clone myself onto these 12 agents. My job was to turn each of them into a little Josh, by showing them how to do what I did. By gosh, that's what I tried to do. I worked my tail off, telling people what to do, assuming that, armed with that knowledge, they would start doing exactly what I had done when I ran my own agency. For some weird reason, though, it just didn't happen. The dream heads south. At that time, there were 2,500 sales teams within Prudential nationwide. When I started out, the team I had inherited had ranked number 1,863 in that network. Nothing but opportunity, right? 6 months later, 5 of my salespeople had left, and I had led my team right down into the basement. We now ranked at number 2,402. My business was in a free fall. Something had to change, and it had to change in a hurry. But I had no idea what it was. Here are some questions for you to consider before we move forward. Have you ever seen or experienced the situation where a top performer was assumed to be a natural manager? How natural did the person turn out to be in that role, in the short term, following promotion? What were the immediate results for the person promoted and the organization? Did stress levels go up or down? Did revenues go up or down? If there's a single lesson that life teaches us, it's that wishing doesn't make it so. Lev Grossman. Chapter 3. You can't lose what you never had. I lost a lot of people. I lost some sleep, too. I wasn't comfortable with the idea of seeing my team at the bottom of the Prudential heap. What was my turnaround plan going to be? That was the question that kept me up at night. Of course, I didn't think ignoring my remaining team members was going to be part of that plan. The people who had stuck around were good salespeople, and they deserved the best support, advice, and coaching I was capable of giving them. I knew I had to do the very best I could with the people I still had on board. But I also knew I had to hire some new people to replace the folks I had lost, if I wanted to have any hope of righting my ship. Not only that, I had to hire them quickly. There was no time for bad hires. I asked myself a question. What kind of applicant did I need to target to hire someone who was likely to perform at or near the level at which I had performed back when I was the only salesperson who mattered? The answer came back, someone with a strong, proven, personal desire to succeed. I decided that to fill my open slots, I would look for people with that kind of track record. My thinking went like this. If I could confirm applicants' claims to be strongly goal-oriented with something specific they had done to overcome some adversity in the past, if there was something I could document in their work history that showed that attaining goals really and truly mattered to them on a personal level, then, maybe, I stood a chance of making some decent sales hires. By decent, I meant someone who would hit, or come close to, the income targets I set, and stick around for a while. I'm condensing a long story into a short chapter, but the bottom line is that this new approach got us out of crisis mode. Those new hires did, in fact, hit their targets and stick around, and my veteran team members did too. We pulled it together. No one was performing at my level, but our numbers got better. We weren't at the very top of the heap, but we weren't at the bottom anymore. But I still had a problem that took the form of a question I couldn't answer. Why couldn't I transform each of my team members into a Josh? Why couldn't I just show them what to do and expect them to follow along? Wasn't that supposed to be all I had to do? Apparently not. Effective management, I now know, is not a matter of hiring the right people, showing them what to do, getting out of their way, and then gliding serenely, eagle-like, above everything. I hadn't lost the ability to manage. I never had it. I hadn't even figured out what an effective manager was. I wanted to figure that out. Change the people to change the culture. Chapter 4. The Guys on a Submarine. Those go-getters I had hired at Prudential after I had nearly driven my office into oblivion did have something going for them, of course. What I discovered, although I didn't realize it at the time, was the attitude corner of David Sandler's famous behavior, attitude, technique triangle, also known as the success triangle. You and I will be looking at that model in depth later in this book, but right now I'd like you to take a brief look at the three sides of the success triangle. Those goal-oriented, achievement-driven salespeople I brought on all had one of the three corners down cold. They tended to see opportunity in themselves, their situation, and their marketplace. Even big challenges didn't get them down for long. They bounced back. What was interesting was that even my recent achievement-driven hires sometimes went into slumps. Occasionally they coasted, hit plateaus, or they became inconsistent. Over time, I found even the people with great attitude got a little complacent. Yes, I had hired enough of them to keep the office afloat, but I realized that if all of them ever decided they were too comfortable, or if they all started easing off at the same time, my office would start to sink. Again. That's when it hit me. I was now captain of a sales submarine. Yet I was surrounded by people I would never, in a million years, have chosen to accompany me on an actual undersea voyage. Attitude or no attitude, they were missing something. When I realized what it was, my stomach started to turn. You see, I had served in a nuclear submarine for the U.S. Navy from 1974 until 1980. One of the things I learned during that time is that when you serve on a submarine, you are putting your life into the hands of your crewmates every time you descend below the ocean surface. Emergencies can and do happen without warning. When they do, there is no time to pull out a manual, issue remedial instructions, or hold someone's hand. People not only had to know how to do their jobs, but they also had to know how to do each other's jobs, if that's what circumstances demand. Also, they have to be able to execute to perfection, instantly, every time, on instinct. Otherwise, you may never surface again. And that's not good. I couldn't have put it properly into words at the time, but a kind of dread spread through my body when I realized that the guys who had been around me on a submarine were very, very different from the people I had on my sales team. The people to whom I entrusted my life on that submarine had a great attitude, and in that respect the two groups resembled each other. But those on the submarine had something else. Not only that, they did something else, something that no one in my office was doing. They practiced constantly. Train your people to be able to execute to perfection, instantly, every time, on instinct. Chapter 5. Attitude is not enough. To make it onto the crew roster of a nuclear submarine, you have to have more than the right attitude. The right attitude helps. It's vitally important. But it's not enough. You have to be able to take over someone else's job in a heartbeat and execute that job perfectly from the first second onward, from muscle memory, also known as unconscious competence. There is no room for error. If something happens underwater and the crew needs to respond, there is no time for on-the-job training. You have to know what you're doing. If for some reason you don't, you're threatening the lives of everyone else on board, including your fellow crew members. Specifically, me. From my point of view, as your fellow crewmate, it doesn't matter how great your attitude is if, when there's a major problem below the surface, you A. don't know what to do, or B. haven't had extensive enough practice doing it. If either of those situations exists, I don't want you on the submarine, and neither does anyone else. You're just too big of a risk. These are the two big reasons that there are plenty of people who can and do perform superbly in other military settings, but who simply don't make the grade when it comes to submarine duty. Even though their attitude may be great, their technique is still wobbly. and their behavior isn't yet second nature, isn't yet muscle memory. To serve on a nuclear submarine, you have to embrace and live a working culture where you are constantly drilling, constantly training, constantly learning. In this culture, rare among military units, you're never finished learning. Let me repeat. You have to be able to take over someone else's job to a 100% efficiency level instantly, which means you have to get used to going beyond your comfort zone. You have to make practice a way of life. On this crew, drills are going on all the time. It's quite literally a matter of life and death whether one crew member has successfully ingrained the techniques and behaviors necessary to move from simply knowing how to do a job into owning how to do a job. Owning the job means knowing what to do and doing it until it becomes second nature. That's a learning culture. That's a culture based on expanding and strengthening muscle memory. That's the kind of crew I worked on when I served on a nuclear submarine. The men I had the honor of serving with had the right attitude, yes, but they also had the right technique and the right behavior. Another point, they were never, ever satisfied. Some of the crew on those submarines have been out of the service now for 15 to 20 years or even longer, but they still have the routine of doing the drills. They're just drilling something else. They know that learning never stops, or at least never should stop. The ideal for these guys is that when it's time to actually execute a skill, you don't have to stop and think, what part of my training is applicable here? It just happens. You just do it. If you have to pause to ask that question during an emergency or when at battle stations on a nuclear submarine, you're probably already dead. And so is the guy next to you. Why did I tell you all this? Because there came a point in my career where I realized that the model for adult learning I was using to recruit, manage, and retain salespeople needed to be based on all three parts of the success triangle: attitude, behavior, and technique. Attitude, as my experience in the Navy taught me, is not enough. As it turns out, the U.S. Navy isn't the only institution saying that. Just do it. Nike. Chapter 6. The Sandler Success Triangle. The Sandler Success Triangle, which I had never heard of when I first worked as a sales manager, was, and is, justly famous in the world of training and development. It has 3 points: behavior, attitude, and technique. As it happens, these are precisely the same 3 elements the Navy focuses on in developing people for the nuclear submarine program. The Navy doesn't use that language, of course, but that's what actually happens. You make quantum leaps in all 3 of those areas, or you don't make the program. Here's why I have to give you a little bit of background about how the Navy gets you ready to serve on the crew of a nuclear submarine. There's a special institution dedicated exclusively to that purpose, the Naval Submarine School at the U.S. Naval Base in Groton, Connecticut. All those who volunteer and are provisionally accepted to work on nuclear submarines have to go through submarine school. That means you have to pass through a series of evaluations and exercises in which the Navy assesses your outlook on life, your capacity to contribute effectively to a team, and your overall psychological confidence, self-esteem, and self-image. That's 1 point of the success triangle right there. Attitude. But what about the other 2? To answer that, I have to tell you a little bit about the way the Navy structures its drills for the people it has decided to place in submarine school. To prepare young volunteers for the rigorous demands of submarine service, submarine school infuses sailors with the culture, esprit de corps, and indeed the behavior, attitude, and technique expected of every submarine crew member. For attitude, as I've suggested, The Navy closely evaluates each sailor's outlook on life, capacity for teamwork, overall psychological.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?